Coalition administrations have proven to be a challenge in the majority of South Africa's municipalities. Coalitions in Gauteng, the Eastern Cape, Free State, KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga municipalities have in recent months collapsed, leading to non-delivery of services to communities. And with 2024 general elections looming and analysts predicting a weakened ANC, what is to be said of a multi-party national government? For more on this, we are now joined by Pranish, Desai, Senior Data Analyst at Good Governance Africa, South African Local Government Association President, Bheki Stofile, and the Head of Local Government Program at Public Affairs Research Institute, Dr. Thina. So, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight on In Focus. Dr. Stofile, let me start with you. The prominence of coalition politics, what we have seen so far, falsifying of qualifications and other court documents. We have seen disunity. We've seen breakdown in several councils as well as in high-profile metros. We've seen, for example, an exchange of mayors in the Johannesburg metro alone, 6 in the last 3 years. A lot of instability. Firstly, could we have anticipated this chaos and this limitation that comes about because of multi-party coalitions?
Greetings to you and your listeners, including the fellow panelists. I will speak from what we have done over the last 8 or so years when we identified the possibilities, because remember, if you read the Municipal Structures Act, it gives a rise to what is commonly known in South Africa as independent councillors. And looking into the Municipal Structures Act, and the association worked a process in anticipation of what it might happen in the local government system. And that anticipation, it was drilled down up until to 2015 when we interacted with the Dula Oma Institute to help us. Is it what we are seeing is real or is going to be realized, or we are just seeing or dreaming whilst you are walking? And 2016 local government, what we have seen then, it became a reality. 27 coalition government led by not more than 3 parties emerged out of the 2016 local government elections. And having had all that information, we then engage those that are having a responsibility in terms of legislating, or parliamentarians that have a responsibility to review and look the laws. Part of the issues that influenced us to do that, it was we understood that making a law is to cap a particular behavior, and so that we have a standardized way of operation. And these are the reasons that we went to the parliamentary various committees, and including the executive of the country, raising this issue since 2015. And then 2021, we were surprised when everybody was shocked, because already in the sector we knew, and we put it in the table for deliberations by those that are supposed to take a particular view over them, either legislate or develop a particular instrument that is going to help the communities. Because ultimately, what we have learned out of the 2015 to now, 2021, is the possibilities of instability in local government. What we anticipated then, we all saw it in 2021. Now, local government municipalities that are under coalition are over 80, and with 6 political parties. Now, you can imagine a chaos, a fiasco of the 2016, where there were 3 parties. Now it's 6 parties with different interests. Of course, the tempo and the interest, it will be then different of the 2016 situation. And here, it cannot be an issue that we have not anticipated, but the pace and speed of those that are supposed to take a particular decision and try to manage the situation going forward. And it is a problem that we are going to face going into the future. Thank you very much.
Let's bring you in here now, Pranish, from what we're just hearing, from 27 to 80, 6 political parties. Are there particular trends, for example, that we are picking up in terms, for example, of the combination of parties in these multi-party coalitions, where you would find a certain combination or a certain arrangement works better than others?
Firstly, good evening to you, my fellow panelists, and everyone at home who's watching. There are certain trends that we can pick up. Increasingly, we are seeing that, especially at the metro level and high-level municipalities, we are seeing that there has been a coordinated effort by opposition parties in the national space, at least, so the DA, EFF, Action SA, these sorts of parties, to systematically exclude the ANC from governing in these areas. At the same time, we have seen the ANC, when in opposition, ally themselves with some of these oppositions which initially vote for other parties in places like Johannesburg, in terms of other candidates for mayors, as was the case in the EFF voting for Mayor Palatse initially in 2021 in Johannesburg, who then parties like the EFF then rejoin with the ANC in terms of their voting patterns, join in terms of installing votes of no confidence in incumbent mayors, and as a result, chaos and acrimony is exacerbated. It is clear also that political parties have been unable to adequately deal with the shifting political dynamics of South Africa, in that we have a declining major party in the ANC, but no other parties has sufficient support to command majorities across the country. So, across the board, they need to find a way to have a more productive cooperative relationship. And if part of the problem, as my colleague from Salga has said, is that our institutional framework doesn't always facilitate cooperation between parties, then that needs to be looked at both the local level, but given where we are going towards in the provincial and national structures as well, be looked at that level as well.
Yeah. But is that something that can be regulated, Dr. Thina? Is that something that can be regulated? Can we intervene at a regulation level? Is that not, in a sense, trying to micromanage a political process?
Not really. I mean, I can use a basic example because recently we've had some of our political parties who have been engaging primarily with Western governments, particularly in the Nordic countries, who have visited those countries such as Norway, and they've been having engagements to understand how these countries have been managing coalitions over the years, because they also fell into coalition formations as back from the 1980s or so. So yes, those governments have managed to formulate regulatory legislation to make sure that there is stability. For example, in countries such as Germany, in countries such as Norway, there is a regulation which stipulates that mayors cannot be removed during their term of office, because it brings in a lot of instability when you look at the way in which the executive is supposed to be governed. It affects the day-to-day operations from a political management level, but also from an administrative level, if you are going to be having political heads continuously being removed from office and being replaced by other political candidates that are coming from different parties, and also having the disagreements that happen even during that period, where we can see in South Africa that we can spend a week to 2 weeks without a mayor in a municipality. So yes, regulations are very important, to insulate our local democracy and our council executive management structures that need to ensure that there is service delivery.
Yeah, Dr. Stofile, I mean, while we are still on that point, we have this thing in South Africa called separation of powers. So you've got the judiciary, you've got a parliament, and you've got the executive. One can't tell the other what to do. So if executive takes a decision in who they want to be in coalition with and how that arrangement is going to be set up, are we now not saying Parliament must interfere with another arm of state and tell it how to run its affairs. Please unmute for us if you can.
I think we must look into the theory of the three spheres of government. And if you read the Constitution, it says are independent, interrelated, but dependent to each other. And if you read that inter alia with Section 154 of the Constitution, it then says, in the event that a sphere of local government experience difficulties, national and provincial government must provide support. So the instruments of law are there, and that is not seen as interference. And therefore, intervening and assisting, capacitating municipality is permissible by a supreme law of the land. And that is why you see in terms of Section 100, intervening in provinces when provinces are dysfunctional, and so on. So in this case, it's not an interference. Remember, Parliament is made to make laws. Judiciary is made to interpret and implement the laws that have been made by Parliament. So there is a separation. And that separation is clearly defined in terms of the roles and functions of different arms of state in dealing with the situation that we are supposed to deal with. Here's the weakness where it is. Let me put it this and throw the cat in the vision. The problem is to deal with politics and reasons for coalitions to collapse is because of two reasons in our research. One of the reasons is whoever that comes in as a councillor and a so-called kingmaker, that person comes with the demands that I must employ X number of people, that bloat the municipal, what you call labor turnover, and then increase the cost of labor to municipality. That's one issue. The second issue is that each one wants a piece of a cake.
Yeah.
And that piece of a cake, it's more about what is my influence on the tenders that goes to a municipality.
Yeah.
Now, at that point, it's where the community is left outside. There is a very serious contradiction of the democracy, local democracy, that we espoused in terms of the Constitution and participation of communities when a decision is taken in terms of vote that is tied. So I think that is the issue and processes that legislatively can come handy in the local space as an attempt to establish peace and order into the local government space.
Back live on In Focus has been a concern for many as they're seeing disunity, instability, delayed processes. As we speak, Tshwane Metro doesn't have a mayor. It hasn't had a mayor for at least 2 weeks, and there's been a lot of back and forth and uncertainty within that multi-party government there because of intra-party politics, but also a lack of cooperation amongst the various political parties. Dr. Thina and Zo helping us in this conversation, Pranish Desai, as well as the president of Salga, Bheki Stofile. Pranish, let's look at that in its practicality. How would, for example, this panel come up with laws, regulations that are going to help us here, right? The ANC and the EFF had an agreement, a gentleman's agreement in the back door to say, you are going to vote for our mayor in Ekurhuleni and we will vote for your mayor in Johannesburg. When they get to voting in Ekurhuleni, the ANC decides to raise its own candidate to take up the position of mayor. Completely not part of what they had agreed on. Immediately, the EFF pulls back and whatever plan that they had collapsed. And they said, we are not going to support your mayor in Johannesburg until we are sure of your support in Ekurhuleni. How do you police that kind of political battering to protect citizens?
Thanks for the question. So, 2 years ago, Salga did publish, together with Dula Omar Institute, a framework on how to, manage local government coalitions. In there, one of the recommendations was that the parties to coalition agreements publish their agreements, whether they government gazetted or publish it in another way. And that way, citizens have a barometer or framework or, something according to which they can actually hold political parties to account. That Salga recommendation has been echoed by others, including the Mapangubwe Institute. And that is one way in which can encourage transparency and accountability on behalf of political parties. But one of the more disappointing aspects is that political parties had these recommendations ahead of the 21 elections and actually decided not to do these things. And so they bear a large share of the blame in not choosing to do these things, which is partly why, across this panel, we've all said that there needs to be some level of regulation at a higher level that compels these things to happen. Because while you can't completely regulate political processes like coalition formation, you can do more to ensure that, at least you're giving yourself a chance, the best chance possible for stability, effective government that delivers for citizens, and also transparency.
Yeah. So, Dr. Thina, you agree with the fact that just transparency around these agreements would be enough to hold parties to their word?
Absolutely. I do agree that transparency is very much needed under these circumstances. But one of the other major concerns that one does really look at, and I've recently pointed it out in one of the articles that are published for the Mail and Guardian, which was titled The Unmaking of Mayoral Leadership in Coalition City Governments, is the fact that, when it comes to the election, because what we are seeing primarily here is the contestation of political positions in the executive, particularly in major cities. So you find that the mayoral seat and the speaker's seat are the greatest contestations, bones of contestations between political parties when it comes to them getting into agreements, followed by which political party is going to have a share over the positions of MMCs. So my concern is that when these coalition parties come together, to agree on which party is going to take which seat, citizens are not engaged in that methodology. We know that, for example, when we go into a local government election, political parties do declare to the public who their mayoral candidates are going to be. And there is now a process of engaging these leaders when they do their campaigns. But once the coalition agreement comes to a collapse, we see all sorts of names emerging from local political parties without a proper process of engaging communities and the public, especially their own constituencies, to actually understand whether this kind of candidate that is being put forward by the political party is the suitable candidate that will lead council. So we are not engaged. We are not engaged in terms of what really constitutes mayoral leadership and what criteria is political parties using and to what extent are they engaging the communities. Because one thing that I would like to point out is the fact that representative democracy has got its own limitations. Once political parties are elected into office, the kinds of decisions that are taken in council are very exclusionary to citizens, and therefore we only have a very slight insight in terms of influencing the decisions when it comes to these candidates. So that's my qualm in the whole process, that we are disengaged and we are not brought into the conversation, and obviously providing that sense of legitimacy coming from the electorate.
Yeah, but Stofile, part of the arrangement now that has been put in place between the Economic Freedom Fighters and the ANC is that we will get mayoral candidates from minority parties. So none of us will occupy the mayoral candidate. Now, Dr. Nzo is saying that is going to find us in a situation where sometimes we have candidates who actually don't have the qualities that are required in a mayor to occupy that position. How do we police that?
Yeah, let me piggyback on what the two panelists raised earlier and then come to this question. Because we must understand, what is this animal called local government? Both legislatively, its political theory, and the conception of it, as you know, that it was the last leg of negotiation in CODESA, in those years, and that is why it was only accepted to have a transitional local government since 1995 to 2000. I think the drafters of the Constitution, which unfortunately today they are failing us, all of them, in the negotiations, they made it clear that what you need to do in the local government space, you need to have a 50% of proportional representation and 50% of the constituency base, which we are referring to as a what, going to elections. South Africans must ask themselves a question: how on earth did we allow the situation where the community or community-based individuals chosen by individuals to be overtaken by political interest and contest elections on behalf of the political interest? I think that's the first misnomer in the whole debate, which led us to where we are today. And that is why you'll find confusion, because we are not interested to deal with the real source of the confusion that takes into account. It might reflect in different flavors going into the future. Look, our research, it says, and the recommendation, that one of the weaknesses is this one: you circumvent the will of the people. And after circumventing the will of the people, you sit in the top table and you share the cake and cut it amongst yourselves according to size that you have an interest. And at that point, community are just spectators in that process. Yet the law says a municipality, it must develop through mayor a 5-year plan, which is commonly known in the public as IDP. And then that IDP, it must be costed. Now, here are coalitions sitting and have a gentleman's agreement. Within a short space of time, a municipality must be established. And that is what we are saying. Legislators, looking into the developments and the trends, because coalitions are going to be with us for many years, 80-something now. I'm expecting over 100 in the coming elections of local government 2026. Now, with that in mind, what plan do we have in managing that? Part of that, what we are recommending, or we have been recommending since time in Mayoral 2015, is that, one, reconsider the time of establishment of municipality in terms of Section 12 notice of the Municipal Structures Act, in which establishing of a council. Consider that time, because that time is not reasonable, is not taking into consideration of the voters' interest at the particular results declaration. That's one part. The second part is that these agreements that are agreed, if you accept to extend that period, locate a time in which you go back to voters who said, I don't want in this municipality to be only one party. I want multiple parties to participate in the decision-making processes. That is why local government is designed as a three-legged pot. Is the administration, is a council, is a community. And that is why prior passing budget and ITP, you must effectively engage community. But what it has been an experience over time, community is by the way, and this is the nature of our own legislation, the manner in which we manage the legislation, and that is the weakness. Now, going back to your question about the piecemeal relations, you know, the danger of that piecemeal relations is this one. This is what I've said in the sauna when we debated in Parliament, responding to President. Is that, take for instance, closing your eyes without using a party political eye. If you go to Nelson Mandela, go to Tshwane, go to city of Johannesburg, go to Ekurhuleni, here is the reality of public, what it says to the voters, what it says to government. They said, we wish you to go out and establish a government in which that government, ANC will have 4 councillors in the executive. DA will have 4 councillors in the executive. EFF will have 1, and in the case of Gauteng, the Action SA will have 1, which is a different case in Nelson Mandela. 4-4-1-1. 1 EFF, 1 the committee organization in that place. Then you form a government. Now we had a conversation, because here the fight is about the control to the levers of resources, financial resources in this case, including employment. Now, if you have a person that has only 1 seat in council and say it must be a mayor, and then you run a process that you have never complied with in terms of your own agreement that you have signed, which it must factor into IDP as a program, like a memorandum. That's what we are talking about, memorandum of acceptance, and check the views of the public about what we have agreed, so that the public must hold you accountable. So these are the issues that we have been talking about and saying. And I want to say, you can have 1 person as a mayor. When that person as a mayor, just as a watchdog, who has no decision whatsoever, because it doesn't enjoy the majority of the council, it had to navigate through, and he will be a pushover, because there will be this particular interest of this political party and the interest of that political party. In fact, by the way, we said to leadership of government and parliament, go and study the process of coalition, the process of governance in Canada. So that you have a better appreciation that you need to intervene as a government, not for your sake, political interest, but for the interest of the community, and the community must then participate in terms of, yes, Stofile, we agree, he must be a mayor. Or no, we believe as the voters, we said sharing this power or this office, it must be occupied by this person. So what I'm saying, we are losing the contribution and participation of voters. Voters become spectators on our battles about how the cake it must be shared.
Extend the time for the formulation of council and allow for voters to participate even in the agreements that are being formulated. When we return, we want to look further into this idea that an external prompting would, for some reason, help here as far as the presidential panel is concerned. Many panels have been set up before. Many reports have been put together. They make for good table decoration. I don't know whether this time around they will be implemented, but we'll hear from our panel when we continue next day. And we are talking multi-party coalitions and why the work and what needs to be done to enforce greater accountability when service delivery suffers. Pranish, what has convinced you that an external prompting from a presidential panel will help, right? We've seen a panel before, the Slavic panel on electoral reform. I mean, we are still engaged in that process. Even today, it's been back and forth in Parliament. It hasn't been adhered to or implemented by any degree of measure. I mean, if we take something that happened recently, the panel on Pala Pala, it was taken to court, it was voted on, was kicked out of Parliament. Why do you think a panel set up by the president on this particular matter is going to be any different?
Thanks. So, at Good Governance Africa, the organization where I work, we've called for the president and the cabinet to convene a special independent panel to look at the issue of coalition politics in South Africa, not merely at the local level, but given that our experiences with it in South Africa have primarily been at the local level up until now, that will naturally be an area of focus. To look at the existing legislative frameworks around things like the Municipal Structures Act and do these sorts of things, build on the work that others, including Salga, have done, and come up with a unified set of recommendations that not only Parliament and COCTA and Salga can work on, but policy analysts, the civic society and non-profit sector can also have as a reference point, as a means to hold political parties to account, and then also have political parties have it as a reference tool on how can we actually, if we are interested in making the system work and deliver for citizens, how can we change our own behavior to do that? But most importantly, it's to give a reference point for citizens themselves. There's currently not much information, as Dr. Nzo and Councillor President Stofile have indicated, on how citizens can actually hold coalitions to account. And that's partly because there are not that many mechanisms by which they can do that outside of elections. So, a panel can help inform citizens in that way. Uniquely, a panel will have its findings publicly accessible. And as a result, it does provide a reference point, a singular barometer according to which, these various actors across civic society, citizens, government, business community, and that can use to make sure that coalitions heading into the future are more productive.
Yeah. Dr. Nzo, can we achieve that without a panel? We're a country of panels. We spend a lot of money, millions and billions in some instances, setting up panels that put up reports that make for good coffee table decoration, and nothing really ever happens. You've mentioned Norway, you've mentioned Germany. What is quite significant about those particular countries is just their political culture that allows for parties from opposing sides to be able to work together and cooperate together when it comes to the good of the nation. Is it possible to cultivate that kind of political culture in South Africa with the varying ideologies that the parties in this country aspire to?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because as like you're saying, South Africans are actually panel fatigued. They are commission of inquiries fatigued. So, these kinds of processes, they have their own merits and demerits. Yes, on the one hand, it is very important for us to really move legislatively, because there were many assumptions when the Municipal Structures Act and the Systems Act when they was established, that we will have a majoritarian type of council, and out of that type of council there would always be a given stability. But now there are political shifts, and for the past few years, in fact since the 2016 local government elections, we have seen that unfortunately with the hung councils that have come into effect, these pieces of legislation are not really helping to manage these processes. So yes, legislatively, we need to get a move on. We can't go on like this. But at the same time, we also look at the demerits of such panels. For example, if we are going to talk about issues relating, to accountability, where the public will be engaged and go back to actually look at these decisions, citizens are actually, very disillusioned about the whole concept of holding government accountable, because the kind of methodologies that are used, we're seeing a government that is unresponsive in the manner in which it actually enacts on its legislative mandate, enacts on its own interventions. So that's another primordial kind of setup that we have to look at when we talk about accountability, the extent to which citizens are going to be able to use these kinds of structures, and the kinds of decisions and recommendations and implementation, into account. So that's another perspective. But also, most importantly for me, Thabo, is the fact that communities need engagement from a bottom-up approach. Yes, we can rope in, a presidential panel from a top-down approach, but what about a bottom-up approach where councils are actually, committed in terms of changing the political culture, particularly the patronage political culture that has manifested, in our institutions? That's one aspect where I absolutely agree with Councillor Stofile when he says that we need to look beyond party politics, because under the given circumstances, we are even seeing the emergence of non-partisan organizations that are coming up and actually contesting in these kinds of elections, the local government elections. So how are we going to deal with those dynamics is very important.
Dr. Stofile, as we wrap up, one of the issues is, of course, how to enforce lines of accountability now, not in the future. I know Salga has done your research, you've consulted the Daloma Institute, you've come up with recommendations. But what we are sitting with now, for example, in KwaZulu-Natal, is the NFP, EFF, ANC coalition saying the IFP is, for example, ignoring their request for a meeting because they want to push for a motion of no confidence. Currently, service delivery is suffering. How do we hold whoever accountable for a lack of delivery? Please unmute for us again.
Thank you very much. I think there are instruments of holding municipal councillors accountable. The question is, are those instruments sufficient or enough? And my argument, as the COGTA in the recent past said, we need to engage in the wholesome review of laws and regulations that governs municipalities, because in the current moment, it's over 100 laws and regulations that govern municipalities, and therefore a municipal manager become a clerk, not a strategic implementer of decision of council. And that is why people don't see this and will see a failing municipality, because we don't understand what it hamstrung the municipality to perform the duties that municipalities are supposed to perform. And we are happy that at long last, after many years of this argument and debate, we finally agreed that we need to review laws that are governing local government. Today I was in Northwest, and part of the issues that we raised and discussed with municipalities is that how do we then provide accountability and respond to challenges of communities. And I think, my leader, it will be understood only by those that are in local government, those that look into it and read into a news and don't understand the difficulties that municipalities are facing internally insofar as meeting that. What is key to me, and everything can be said, is what Thomas Sankara once said. We must have a courage to turn our back from old formulas because they haven't worked at all. The old formula, it was to elect a councillor, place a councillor, and there's no accountability from political party of a councillor that commit wrong things. The first thing that we must do is to introduce instrument of accountability from political parties, because research that we have conducted is that 90% of the wrongs that are in the public are as a result of political parties. Different instructions, different deployment, and many other things that have been ventilated to courts today, right, which vindicated us on this issue. So to us, I think the immediate task is to how do we develop an instrument that each and every party that contests elections is held accountable.
Let's leave it there for tonight. Appreciate you all. Thank you very much for coming on tonight. That was Dr. Thina of the Public Affairs Research Institute, Salga President, Bheki Stofile, and Good Governance Africa's Pranish Desai.